Today, we welcome to the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series Mike Berners-Lee. Mike Berners-Lee is the author of influential books, including A Climate of Truth, There Is No Planet B, and How Bad Are Bananas? As the founder and director of Small World Consulting, he helps organizations of all sizes and sectors address the challenges of Anthropocene. He's also a professor at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom, where his work focuses on climate sustainable food and land and the broader challenges of the Anthropocene. In February 2025, he received the Planet Earth Award from the Alliance of the World Scientists in recognition of his work on environmental solutions. Mike, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So I'm really impressed about the important work you're doing. I've read your books, a lot of interesting ideas, and particularly in relation to climate action and its relationship indeed with truth. This is the first theme that I like to discuss with you. In A Climate of Truth, your most recent book, you emphasize the role of truth in addressing the climate crisis. And so, how do you see misinformation impacting global efforts towards sustainability? And what role does global citizenship education play in countering these challenges, if at all?
Okay. Well, the book's called A Climate of Truth, and it sounds like a book about climate, but actually it's a book about practically anything you'd care about, any environmental issue, any social issue, or even indeed the whole question of how humans are going to thrive in the decades ahead. Now we're in this Anthropocene, this era in which we're so powerful and the planet's so fragile compared to us. So, and I sort of came at it largely through a climate lens to begin with, because I've been working on climate stuff for 20 years or so, and we're really not getting anywhere at all, right? Every year we're putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere even faster than we were the year before. We're making the planet worse by a larger amount every year than the year before. And it's not just on climate, though. It's on other pollutants. It's on the rate at which we're crashing our biodiversity. All these things are getting out of hand. It's a full-on polycrisis. So in my work, I'm always asking, what's the point of greatest leverage? What's the system looking like? What needs to happen? What is the point of greatest leverage for those who want change?
Yeah.
And if you look, for example, at what's been getting in the way of good decisions around climate, it's not poor judgment or sort of well-intentioned, poor quality thinking. It's flat out dishonesty. Right? So the reason why the 29 climate COPs that we've had, the big global conferences over the last 3 decades that we've been holding in response to the crystal clear need that the scientists have been saying to us, to get on top of climate change. The reason why they haven't got anywhere at all is because of the flat out cynical deceit propagated from the fossil fuel industry, right? It's dishonesty. And if you look closer to hand, for example, at some of the worst things that have happened around climate in my country, in the UK, we've had endless debate over whether or not to open up a new coal mine off the west coast of Cumbria, quite near where I live, actually. And the arguments for that coal mine were fundamentally dishonest right from the beginning. They sound plausible in sound bites on the radio, but when you actually look at them, they were flat out dishonest. And they said that coal mine was going to be carbon neutral. They said it wasn't going to increase the amount of coal dug out of the ground in the world. They said all sorts of things that were just such a lot of nonsense, and they knew it was nonsense. So the point I'm trying to make is that here in the Anthropocene, we need high quality decision making. We've got urgent challenges. These issues are complex. They are all joined together, climate and biodiversity and inequality and all these questions. we need the best quality decision making that we can get, higher quality decision making than we've ever had. And there simply is not room to have the whole process completely thwarted by the spanner in the works of anybody being deliberately deceitful. And I don't just mean telling lies. I mean any attempt, if any part of the decision making mix is at any point trying to make some people believe things that they don't themselves believe to be the case, then that is just so disruptive that we can't afford it. I'll go to say, some people say, well, there's always been lying in politics. It's always been a factor of life. But we've got to respond to the Anthropocene now. We've got a real crisis on our hands. We've never been in the Anthropocene before. We've never had to deal with this context before. And now we have to, urgently. And in the Anthropocene, we need to evolve socially to the point that we are Anthropocene fit. Otherwise, we're going to experience a very nasty time. And part of that evolution is to radically change our insistence on honesty. Humans need it. I'm not trying to be moralistic. I'm just trying to be practical. If we can't raise the game on honesty, we're in for a very nasty time.
Absolutely.
So, you asked the question, what does this mean for education? Well, we have to bring our kids up to understand what honesty is, what it looks like, exactly why it is that it matters so much. It's not just a moralistic principle, it's an absolute practical necessity.
Absolutely.
And we have to bring our kids up to understand how they can tell what to trust. We need to give them the best critical thinking skills that we can. And we need to give them the skills to know what to do if they find they can't trust something. We need to teach them or bring them up such that they know how to support honest practitioners and how to challenge dishonesty and get it out of the decision-making mix.
Absolutely. And here is the relationship between truth and climate action, pedagogy, education is central. I want to focus on another important theme. I must say that in preparing for this video interview, I watched several of your interviews available in the public domain, and I found that some of your statements are really in line with the publications, some advancing books and academic publications. When you suggested that we need to foster a future leadership that really takes care of the common good and our planet as a whole. So I was very happy to hear such statements from you. And one of the area that oftentimes is discussed within the whole literature on global citizenship education is the relationship with ecology. And so the question is related to ecological citizenship, because your work often highlights the interconnectedness of climate, economy, and society. So how can global citizenship and education, potentially at least, help individuals move beyond awareness and more toward meaningful systematic actions in response to the ecological emergency we are facing now and we will be facing in the future?
Okay, well, I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we need to take the environment more seriously, and sure, of course we do. But we also need to get beyond our sense of separation from the environment. I mean, we are part of the environment. We talk about ourselves as if we're some sort of incredibly special species separate from the rest of the ecological world. And of course, we found ourselves into a position of having huge manipulative power over the rest of the ecosystem without having the wisdom to go with that power. But actually, and we talk about ourselves as if we're the best species in some way, but arguably we're the worst species. We need to see ourselves as fundamentally inseparable from the rest of the ecosystem. We've got to get our heads around that because that's the reality. We are. So, I mean, I talk in the book about new ways in which we need to think, and this is back to education again. But we need to get much better at big picture thinking, systemic thinking. We need to
Mm.
get much better at understanding, not just how the climate agenda is related to the inequality agenda, is related to biodiversity, is related to plastics and other pollution. I mean, of course, we need to understand that kind of systemic thinking, but more deeply than that, we need to understand kind of the interdependence of everything. All these things relate to how we think about economics, how we think about politics, how we think about
Yeah,
society, how we value life, how our relationships work. This whole kind of, we need to
mm,
re-engineer our approach to life. If we don't want to have a very nasty time, we need to
absolutely.
re-engineer our approach to life.
Yeah, and this ties with my next question on the theme of rethinking sustainability. And I do believe that many of our young people today feel trapped in an economic model that focuses mostly on money making over sustainability. And
Well,
so,
we're all, yeah.
yeah, please, please.
Okay, well, we're all feeling trapped to some degree or other in that one. Okay, that the whole
Mm,
it's unsurprising that an economic framework that dates back to a pre-Anthropocene era in which we could expand. If we wanted more of something, it was just a question of could we get hold of it. If we made a mess, it's okay. The world would be, broadly speaking, capable of putting itself back together again, right? Those days are over. And we need an economics that reflects that. So, you know, we have this kind of crazy addiction to GDP growth, right? This
mm,
mad single metric, so reductionist. It doesn't track with the well being of people, and it absolutely does not track with the well being of the planet. And
yeah,
yet, there's barely a mainstream politician anywhere who will challenge it properly. So, the emperor is not wearing any clothes on this one. And it's so depressing that we're stuck in it, right? And to hear, in the UK, we hear the Chancellor of the Exchequer talking about this stuff, and yet the logic of the argument that says this is a load of old nonsense is clear cut, and it is well understood by so many people. You know, people who have a careful look at economics pretty well, clear majority will tell you GDP growth is just the wrong thing to be pursuing. There are some kinds of growth we can try and pursue. We can try and pursue growth in biodiversity and growth in the cleanliness of our air and growth in our healthcare systems and growth in our strength of our communities and the quality of our lives and so on. There's all kinds of things we can try and we can aspire to grow.
yeah,
I think the whole kind of reductionist squeezing down everything down into a single metric. I think that's just um, emblematic of our approach to life that is just nowhere near systemic enough, right? We're doing this.
absolutely.
There are so many different ways of describing it. We're doing too much left brain thinking and not enough right brain thinking. We haven't learned to do systemic thinking enough. We're in too much of a rush. We're just, it's just there's so much that's wrong with the way that we think about economics, and so no wonder it's very frustrating for all of us, but young people especially, who you know grow up into the world. They look around. They can see that what's needed is something different, and yet they're getting these persistent messages drummed into them the whole time that this is the way you do life. These are the things that matter. This is what you pursue and everything. They can see that doesn't matter. That match up, and I think that disconnect manifests itself either in frustration or in a kind of deep, unconscious, gnawing unhappiness, or um, or sometimes most healthily in a direct challenge in people saying this isn't
Mm.
right, we've got to do something about it.
Yeah, oftentimes I deal with students frequently because I do teach several classes, and the lack of hope towards realizing certain ideals is also another big problem because some of my young students would really love to take action, but they don't know where to start. And so I
Okay.
believe that here the theme of empowering future generations is another big theme I wanted to discuss with you today. So let's begin by saying that given the urgency of the climate crisis, based on the discussion we are having today and based on your books, Climate of Truth, There is No Planet B, and beyond, what are, in your opinion, the values, since we mentioned the lack of values, the need to rethink values in our modern societies, what are the most important values and mindsets that educational institutions, schools, and universities should foster to prepare students to be effective agents of change, or simply really to take simple action
Mm,
on a daily basis that would contribute to the common good and this discussion we are having on climate
yeah.
action.
Okay, so this is a really important question because all of us need to have a realistic sense of agency, right? So,
Mm,
I don't want to pretend that any of us can single-handedly change the whole world. Um, Although it's possible that one of your students might come up with some way of doing something that really, really does, on their own. But we
yeah,
can all be a meaningful part of the solution, right? So, how do we do that? And the reason I wrote my book is to help people understand what it is they can do, despite the fact that the problem is so urgent, despite the fact that the challenge is so global, and despite the fact that everything so far has not helped. Um, there's still things we can do, right? And the point of maximum leverage is it really is about values, how we live them, and how we insist on them. So that's why my book focuses on honesty as a point of maximum leverage. It's like how to recognize it,
yeah,
how to see the difference between when someone's being really straightforward with you and when somebody is doing something to try and talk you into a belief system. So we could do a lot worse than putting our kids in front of a load of adverts and just asking them the whole time, what is this advert trying to make you think and believe and want? And what techniques are they using? And, and is it in your best interest? And if you work out
yeah,
that it's not in your best interest, what does it tell you about this company? And how can you respond to what this tells you about this company? If you identify that a company is trying to do something that's against your best interests, that tells you don't want to go anywhere near them with a barge pole if you can possibly avoid it. Right? It tells you they're fundamentally nefarious, and you
absolutely.
need them out of your life to the maximum point you can do that. So there's a kind of honesty thing. How do we work out how to trust our politicians? And I, lay out criteria for this in the book, and you can do this in your education. And what do we do if we work out that a politician can't be trusted? Because if a politician, for example, has deceived us even once deliberately on a matter of policy, it just tells you in one hit, it tells you they're not on your side, and you don't want them anywhere near the decision-making mix
Yeah,
of things that affect your life, right? And the same goes with the media. Like, what's the basis by which we work out whether we can trust something on social media, on traditional media, anywhere? And if we've worked out that a source is fundamentally not trustworthy, maybe because it's owned by a multi-billionaire who's got a track record of nefarious actions, if we've worked that out, then we just need it out of our influence.
mm,
And not only that, but if you want to have wider impact, then um, then go and talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your colleagues. Expand it out, make it embarrassing for people who, if people are just open-eyed, just absorbing rubbish through sources that can't be trusted, then make it clear that that tells you that that person either doesn't know how to think or doesn't or um, or doesn't mind being taken for a ride. Right.
absolutely.
So there's that. So that's honesty. Then related to honesty, and I probably don't talk about this enough in the book. I perhaps felt a bit shy to do so. I was sort of like, who am I to talk about? Who am I to talk about this one?
We can work on another
But
book, no problem.
well, maybe when I've got some kind of wise man guru
Yeah,
status, I don't
no,
know.
I, I,
But
I I love to do that. The
well, no,
intersection of
no, but the
education and climate
sure.
action, we can do that.
But we talked about honesty. But the next one I want to move on to is, I'll just use a very simple word for it, is just kindness, right? We
Kindness.
need, what I mean by that is, we need our politicians, our media, and the businesses that serve us. We need them to care about us.
Yeah,
We need them to be acting in the best interests of people and planet. And, I don't know, in the UK, we don't talk about that anything like enough at election time. We talk
right.
about whether people are funny. We talk about whether people have got attractive narratives that feel good. We barely talk about whether they're honest. And we don't talk anything like enough about what the evidence is that they have proper empathy, that they care not just about their friends and their family and their own social group and the people that they most readily relate to, but do they
Yeah,
have the capacity to care
to
about
care.
all the people within their country that they're trying to be a politician in, and even more importantly, in the wider global community? Do they treat people in Gaza with the same value as people in Israel, as the same value as people in Russia, the same value as people in Ukraine, the same value as people in the US, and the same value as people in their own country? I mean, we've got to have
Mm.
this universal respect. And if people are going to be taking decisions on behalf of the people, either through their role in politics, or their role in the media, which is highly influential, or their role in business, which of course is highly influential, and all these three kind of interact. If they're going to be in positions of influence, then we need them to care about us. It's
Absolutely.
absolutely fundamental.
Care
Um,
for humanity, ethics of care, all themes that emerge in my publications too. So that's very interesting you mentioning this.
mm,
And um, so before we conclude this very interesting conversation with the final challenging question, since we started off this conversation with your most recent book, A Climate of Truth, I'd like you to mention two or three. There we go. We will also include a picture later on in the post-editing session. But a very interesting book, a very interesting team, as well as There is No Planet B, another interesting book of yours. But coming back to A Climate of Truth, could you share two or three core themes besides honesty and care and kindness that you just mentioned? Two or three core highlights, because I believe that our audience will be very interested in knowing directly from you what you believe emerges from your hard work on this most recent book.
yeah. I suppose the first thing to say is that we're not getting anywhere at all
Mm,
in our response to the poly crisis, and
mm,
it's getting very, very serious, which means we need to stand back and ask ourselves, given that nothing's working, what would? And that's what took me to the theme of honesty, right?
mm.
Because that is at the heart of why we're not getting anywhere. So if you if you want to have hope, then the hope is that if we can change the standard on this, we can start getting somewhere, even on the agenda that we haven't got anywhere with before. Then the next thing to say, I suppose, is that when you start looking honestly at the evidence, the quality of analysis goes up, and some very simple things become very, very clear in terms of the practicalities of dealing with the climate crisis that we don't talk about, or the poly crisis, that we don't talk about anything like enough. And I can't list them all out here, but there are things like the need to use less energy, not more,
Yeah.
right? The need to keep the fossil fuel in the ground through a measure that actually does that directly, like a carbon price. The need to eat less meat and dairy could not be clearer from the science, right? It's
Mm,
crystal clear. So what I'm saying is, once you start looking honestly at issues, for all the complexity, some very clear, simple principles just come rising up out of the mist, right? They become
Absolutely.
clear, things that we can just act on right now in the kind of practical, physical sense of it. It also becomes some things about how we do life become extremely clear. The need to think totally differently about our economics, the need to make some critical changes to how we do our politics, the need to deal with inequality, right?
Yeah.
If you know, a platform of honesty creates the ability to become clear about some very, very simple, important principles, which, if we could just not lose sight of them, we would immediately start making enormous headway. So that's probably the second thing to say. The, um, and then from there on, really, the book is about, can we do anything about it? You know, some people say, "Oh well, you know, there's always been lying in politics. Lies is just how we do life. You know, it's just how the world works." And to say that's not the case, right? The evidence
Yeah.
is humans are capable of cultivating the values that we identify we need to have in order to thrive. And right now, it's very, very clear we need to have the value of honesty and we need to have the value of empathy because there's 8 billion of us on this planet, like it or not. And those two values, along with this respect for the environment and this kind of sense of interconnectedness with the environment, you know, those values we've got to cultivate them, all push for them really, really hard. And that, you know, a lot of the book is a how-to of how to do that. And I hope it gives a lot more agency to people who
Yeah.
want to see change. And I'm going to say one more thing,
Please. Yeah.
which is that is it is very clear to me that if we carry on business as usual with the same sort of pathetic attempt to try and deal with things like climate and biodiversity loss and plastic pollution and all the rest of it that we've been doing so far, utterly inadequate, just believing that we can just, broadly speaking, carry on with our lives as we've always been doing, then we're going to get a very, very nasty shock. And I don't think it's too far away. So I would not, I would be surprised if it's more than 20 years away that we have an incredibly unpleasant shock, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if it's less than 10 years away if we carry on as we are. So I just want to create what I think is a realistic sense of urgency here. We have got to wake up right now, and it is not okay to listen to this podcast and then carry on tomorrow with an approach to life that is the same as we've all been doing for years and years. This agenda is absolutely means every one of us right now. Otherwise, we're going to suffer for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's launch together this action praxis oriented campaign. So, we discussed the relationship between truth and climate action. We touched on ecological citizenship, rethinking sustainability, potentially at least empowering youth and future generations. Now, there is a last question called the three keywords question. I know it's a challenging one. And the question is, how would you define educating for global citizenship or global citizenship education in three keywords, and why did you choose those words?
Okay, I'm going to go for honesty, kindness, and critical thinking. So, honesty, everything about what it means. It's not just lying, but it's, you know, you're being honest when a person is imparting to another person the clearest sense of reality as they understand it to be that they are capable of doing. Anything short of that is not honest. And we've got to understand what that looks like. We've got to understand when we're getting it and when we're not. And we've got to understand that if the standard is not being met, we've got to understand what action we can take, what strong action we can take to make sure that those who would be dishonest with us if they could are out of the decision-making mix. Honesty. Kindness, because there are 8.1 billion of us on this fragile planet to get together. We will sink or swim together. And I'm not being moralistic about this. What I mean by kindness is a sense of we have to care about each other. We have to treat each other with a universal respect within and between countries. We've got to tune into that. We've got to learn how to actually have an emotional response, that cares about the lives of people on the other side of the planet or in different social groups to us. And we've got to put that as an important criteria for the people that we put in positions of influence. That's in politics, the people who run our media, the people who run our business, anyone who has influence. So that's kindness. And then critical thinking, it's a complex world out there. There are nefarious actors who will try to do things that trick us into believing things that aren't the case. They're trying to make us want things that aren't going to make us happy. They're trying to make us believe things that are not the case. They're trying to make us vote in certain ways that are in their interests, that we may think are in our interests, but they're not in our interests. All that stuff is going on in an increasingly sophisticated way. And critical thinking is about being able to spot that, going around with your eyes open so you're not being taken for a ride, so you're not being abused by the relatively small but incredibly effective proportion of the population that would consciously and deliberately do that. And probably it's a bit more than critical thinking. It's the
Perhaps
ability to
critical
snap
consciousness.
Yeah, it's the ability to snap out of it. If I was going to say I'm going to have a fourth word. I'm going to make you give me a fourth word. It's going to be
Absolutely.
courage. It's going to be courage, because it's hard to be the odd one out. If you spot that the emperor's not wearing any clothes, if you're in an economics lesson and you're being taught about the importance of GDP growth and everything, and you can see that that just doesn't fit with the context that humanity's in now, it's awkward to be the one who puts up your hand and says, hang on a minute, this isn't serving humanity, is it? And then stick with that argument and insist on, bring things back to reality. It's difficult to do that. It feels uncomfortable. We all like to be like everybody else most of the time.
Yeah.
And so courage is needed. We need to challenge our friends and our families and our colleagues. We need to stand up and be our own person on this. Yeah, that takes courage. And so we need to bring people up to be courageous.
Also because being courageous leads to taking action. So it's strongly interrelated. All right, a very interesting conversation with Mike Berners-Lee, the author of A Climate of Truth, There is No Planet B and How Bad Are Bananas, professor at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom, and also director and founder of Small World Consulting. Thank you so much, Mike. A real pleasure to welcome you to the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.